Welcome to Human Monsters. Montreal's École Polytechnique is a school affiliated with the Université de Montréal in the province of Quebec, Canada. It offers programs in engineering that are attractive to students who wish to work in that field. On December 6, 1989, Polytechnique was the site of a dark chapter in Canada's history known both as École Polytechnique Massacre and the Montreal Massacre. A lone gunman named Marc Lepine murdered 14 women and injured 10 women and 4 men. 32 years have passed, but for those who were directly affected, the wounds are still fresh. This is that story. Chapter 1. The Monster. Marc Lepine was born Gamil Rodrigue Lias Garbi on October 26, 1964, in Montreal, Quebec, Canada. His father was an Algerian immigrant by the name of Rachid Lias Garbi. His mother was Canadian-born nurse and former nun Monique Lepine. He had a sister named Nadia. Marc's domestic environment was rife with violence. Contributing to this instability was the constant moving. His father worked for a Swiss mutual funds company, and they lived in such disparate locations as Costa Rica and Puerto Rico. They relocated to Montreal in 1968 and established roots. Rachid was a physically abusive tyrant who assaulted his entire family. He was jealous and possessive and frequently beat his wife. He had nothing but contempt for women and was totally open about this perspective. It was his opinion that females exist solely to serve men. He forced his wife to perform clerical duties for his business affairs. If she made one typo, he would slap her, much to the distress of her children, as Rachid made no effort to conceal the abuse from them. He targeted the children for abuse just as often. If he detected sensitivity in his son, he would lash out at him. He felt that to make any allowances for behavior that didn't fall into the rubric of machismo was to mollycoddle him. A pivotal moment in the family's history occurred in 1970, when Rachid hit Marc so hard the welts on his face were just as visible a week later. Monique decided it was time for her and the kids to leave. Their legal separation was processed in 1971, and they divorced in 1976. Monique was awarded full custody of the children. Rachid was given weekly supervised visits. Even with oversight, Marc dreaded these visits because he was still afraid of his father. Eventually, Rachid ceased the visitations, and Marc never saw him again. Rachid also stopped paying child support. Marc refused to discuss his father with anybody years later. In secondary school, Marc came across as a quiet and withdrawn student with mediocre grades. He had one close friend, but remained an outcast among the rest of the student body. He was chastised because of his Arab name, so he changed it legally to Marc Lepine. When pressed, he would cite his hatred for his father as the motivating factor in changing his name. Lepine shut down, speaking very little and revealing even less emotion. He suffered from low self-esteem, which was exacerbated by chronic acne. Relations among the remainder of his family weren't much better. His sister Nadia publicly humiliated him because of his acne and lack of dating activity. He would fantasize about killing her on a regular basis. He even devised a mock grave for her. In 1981, she was placed in a group home because of delinquent behavior and drug use. He was overjoyed to be rid of her. In hopes of finding a positive male role model for Marc, Monique arranged for him to be mentored by a member of the local Big Brothers organization. Marc enjoyed the time he spent with this man, indulging in photography and riding motocross motorcycles. It came to an end in 1979 when the man was arrested due to suspicion of child molestation. Marc stated that sexual impropriety never factored into their relationship. One of Marc's hobbies was to shoot pigeons with his friend using his air rifle. They were also electronics hobbyists, building their own devices. As far as intellectual interests were concerned, Marc became fascinated by the lore of World War II. This fixation drew him insidiously down a path leading to an obsession with and admiration for Adolf Hitler. He enjoyed cinema with an emphasis on violent movies such as the action, war, and horror genres. He took his role as man of the house seriously, doing his chores without being asked, and making repairs when needed. At the age of 17, Lepine wished to join the Canadian Forces as an officer cadet. He applied in September 1981, but he was screened out as, quote-unquote, unsuitable during the interview process. He would go on to tell a friend it was because of his difficulty accepting authority. In 1982, at the age of 18, the Lepine family moved to Saint-Laurent. It was closer to his mother's place of work and to the Cégep, publicly funded post-secondary school unique to Quebec, of Lepine's choosing. This was the beginning of a chapter in Marc Lepine's life he cited as having, quote, brought me no joy, end quote. Marc struggled in college. Starting in August 1982, he embarked on a 2-year pre-university course in pure sciences at Cégep de Saint-Laurent. He failed 2 courses in the first semester, but brought up his grade point average in the second. He worked part-time at the hospital his mother worked as a nurse. He was a food server and custodian. His coworkers remembered him as nervous, hyperactive, and immature. He was attracted to one of his female colleagues, but he was too shy to ask her out. After his first year at college, he switched to a program in electronics technology. It was a 3-year program oriented toward job placement at its finale. He was fondly remembered by his teachers, who said he was a model student, quiet, industrious, and successful academically. For reasons that were never divulged, there was a plummet in his grade point average in the fall of 1985. In the last term of the program, in February 1986, he suddenly stopped going to classes. As a result, he did not complete his diploma. Marc moved out of his mother's home and got his own apartment. In 1986, he applied to the engineering program at École Polytechnique de Montréal. The school admitted him, but with a caveat. He was to complete 2 compulsory courses, including one in solution chemistry. In 1987, Marc was fired from his job at the hospital. His behavior toward the end of his term of employment was described as, quote-unquote, aggressive, which included being disrespectful toward his supervisors. The quality of his work had also deteriorated. He was outraged about his dismissal. He devised a plan to undertake a killing spree concluded by his suicide. His friends later recalled that his general disposition at this time was volatile, with him flying into senseless rages by even the most trivial of criteria. In autumn of 1987, Marc took 3 courses that were required to obtain a diploma. In February 1988, he started a course in computer programming at a private college in downtown Montreal, which was financed with student loans. He moved into another apartment, this one with an old high school friend as his roommate. In the winter of 1989, he took a Cégep night course in solution chemistry in preparation for École Polytechnique. One thing schools couldn't teach him was how to overcome his shyness and get a girlfriend. He was uncomfortable around women. He would cover up for it by bossing them around and showing off his knowledge in front of them. When in the company of his male friends, Marc would convey his hatred of feminists, career-oriented women, and women who worked in professions that were traditionally male-dominated, such as policing. Taking a cue from the father he hated, he felt strongly that a woman's purpose was to remain in the home, taking care of her family. Marc applied once again to the École Polytechnique, this time in 1989. His application was rejected because he failed to get all the requisite credits. In March of that year, he withdrew from the computer programming course. He did well in the CEGEP course, even achieving 100% on his final exam. This was not enough to alleviate his growing disillusionment. In April 1989, he met with a university admissions officer. He complained that women were beginning to dominate the job market and take positions for which men were more appropriately qualified. Marc Lepine had failed at many things, but the massacre and suicide he formulated became his primary ambition, and he would stop at nothing to bring it to fruition. In August 1989, he applied for a firearms acquisition certificate. He received his permit in October. On November 21st, he bought a Ruger Mini 14 semi-automatic rifle at a sporting goods store. December 6th. Marc spends a few hours that day writing letters. Some were addressed to relatives. One letter he wrote was targeted at a much larger contingent, the people of Quebec. This is that letter. Forgive the mistakes. I had 15 minutes to write this. See also Annex. Please note that if I commit suicide today, 89-12-06, it is not for economic reasons, for I have waited until I exhausted all my financial means, even refusing jobs, but for political reasons, because I have decided to send the feminists, who have always ruined my life, to their maker. For 7 years, life has brought me no joy, and being totally blasé, I have decided to put an end to those viragos. I tried in my youth to enter the forces as an officer cadet, which would have allowed me possibly to get into the arsenal and precede Lortie in a raid. They refused me because asocial. I therefore had to wait until this day to execute my plans. In between, I continued my studies in a haphazard way, for they never really interested me, knowing in advance my fate, which did not prevent me from obtaining very good marks, despite my theory of not handing in work and the lack of studying before exams. Even if the mad killer epithet will be attributed to me by the media, I consider myself a rational erudite that only the arrival of the Grim Reaper has forced to take extreme acts. For why persevere to exist if it is only to please the government? Being rather backward-looking by nature, except for science, the feminists have always enraged me. They want to keep the advantages of women, example, cheaper insurance, extended maternity leave preceded by a preventative leave, etc., while seizing for themselves those of men. Thus, it is an obvious truth that if the Olympic Games removed the men-women distinction, there would be women only in the graceful events. So, the feminists are not fighting to remove that barrier. They are so opportunistic, they do not neglect to profit from the knowledge accumulated by men through the ages. They always try to misrepresent them every time they can. Thus, the other day, I heard they were honoring the Canadian men and women who fought at the front line during the World Wars. How can you explain that, since women were not authorized to go to the front line? Will we hear of Caesar's female legions and female galley slaves, who of course took up 50% of the ranks of history, though they never existed? A real casus belli. Sorry for this too brief letter. Marc Lepine. He's got a plan for this day, and he is focused. He had all his tools at his disposal, and he was headstrong. No obstruction could deter him. With one of the letters in his pocket, he commutes to Polytechnique, for this is the site where he will execute his thoroughly premeditated plan. Despite his lack of enrollment in any of the school's programs, his presence was a constant. Anybody who happened to notice him might have seen him there all the time, loitering in a hallway, near the bookstore, the cafeteria, the student co-op store. It was unrequited love, and he was infatuated. He was also possessive and jealous. At 4 p.m. on December 6th, 1989, he made himself comfortable in the registrar's office. He sat down and stretched his legs. Said one employee familiar with him by then, "He's sitting on the bench at the entrance of the office, near the door, and because of his position, he's blocking access to the entrance. Indeed, he's sitting in a way that makes coming in difficult. A number of times he's seen rummaging through a green plastic bag, whose contents he seems to want to hide. He doesn't talk to anyone, and no student addresses him. At one point, one of the employees working at the desk asks if she can help him. He doesn't answer and leaves." Chapter 2. The Massacre. Students are under pressure to study for exams and complete projects. The school is buzzing with students since this was before the age when everyone had a computer with the internet at home. Most enrolled students were making full use of the facility to meet their deadlines. On an individual basis, the stress runs the engine that keeps students resolute and driven. Geneviève Bergeron is working side by side with her teammate, Marco. They are troubleshooting technical problems for a class presentation. Mariesla Marie is accompanied by her boyfriend Benoit as she puts the finishing touches on a presentation for her afternoon class. He assured her he would be there. Natalie Croteau, like many others, has a presentation to make to a class, and she is contemplating her efforts. She is confident it will receive a positive reception. Anne-Marie Lemay is exhausted from all the demands of her course load from that semester. She wrote on a bulletin board in the apartment she shared with some roommates, "Tomorrow is the last day of class, and the last day of my life." Wow, that sounds really depressing at 3 o'clock in the morning. Mariesla Marie is dropped off at the student entrance by her husband. He didn't leave right away. For some undefinable reason, he wanted to watch her walk away. He felt a vague sense of loss with no external catalyst. Marise was certainly surprised when she turned and saw that he was still idling. He was expected at work. 4:45 p.m. Marc Lepine has appeared on the 3rd floor. He's leaning against the wall in a hallway, holding the green plastic bag. Anybody who would have cared to look would have seen that it contained a long object, though the opacity of the bag denied the common bystander a view of what it was. He changes course at 5 p.m., which is the final hour of classes for the semester. He migrates to the 2nd floor. 5:10 p.m. Marc Lepine walks through the hallway leading to classroom C230.4. Other than this isolated classroom, there is nowhere else to go in this part of the building. He enters the room. A student is presenting a project to the class. He walks up to them and puts an immediate halt to the proceedings. He is holding a rifle. He addresses the class, saying, "All right, everyone, stop everything." He shoots at the ceiling. He says, "Girls to the left and guys to the right." None of the students move an inch. He repeats the order, this time with increased volume. After the students are segregated, he says, "Okay, guys, get out. Girls, stay here." The students are dumbfounded. The men begin to leave, though not quick enough for Lepine. He shouted at them, saying, "Move your asses." Some of them wonder if it is just some kind of end-of-semester prank. They consider that he might have shot a blank. Was he just trying to alleviate the tension all the students felt and unveil some much-needed comic relief? The male students and the professor did as they were told. It didn't occur to them that the situation was not only not devised for laughs, but that it was about to escalate in the worst way imaginable. The 9 women in the room were standing at the back. They were too far from the door to escape. Lepine advances toward them. France Chrétien was one of the survivors of the events that followed. She recalled what happened next. Once all the guys were out, there was a moment's silence when no one said anything. Then Lepine asked, "Are you wondering why you're here?" Annie St-Arnoault shot back, "Who are you?" Lepine told her he was a man who was against feminists. In other words, against women like them. Natalie Provost said, "We're not feminists. We're girls who like science." When Provost spoke to journalists from her hospital room, she said, "I told him we were just women studying engineering. We were not necessarily feminists." According to a report by Coroner Soreur, the answer was, "We're not feminists. We've never fought against men." These words were not impactful enough to throw Lepine off course. He opened fire, shooting at the entire group. France Chrétien recalled her reaction. "The rest is sort of in slow motion in my head. I threw myself on the ground and turned around. At times, I could hear everything. At other times, it was just noise." Some women collapsed on top of Chrétien. She went on to say, "It was like it was raining. It was raining bits of concrete everywhere." José Martin was part of the group. She told Montreal's La Presse newspaper a year later that she had time to crouch down. She caught one bullet in her arm. She said, "That's when I realized that he wasn't shooting blanks. I couldn't believe it. No one could believe it." Lepine emptied the entirety of his gun's magazine, a tally of 30 bullets. Martin remembered his behavior at this time. Lepine had a smile on his face. He seemed very proud of himself. It's as if he was in a dream and everything was going according to plan. He left the classroom without so much as a glance. He was probably thinking about his next victims. When Marc Lepine left the room, there were women on the floor. 3 were critically but not fatally injured: José Martin, Natalie Provost, and France Chrétien. The remaining 6, Hélène Colgan, Natalie Croteau, Barbara Dagnon, Anne-Marie Lemay, Sonia Pelletier, and Annie St-Arnoault, did not survive. With his homicidal rampage well underway, Marc Lepine stalks the hallway that led to the photocopiers in room C229, sure to be a hive of activity as students anxiously prepared their presentations for their looming deadlines. Lepine stormed into the room. He bumped into a woman and shot her promptly thereafter. He shot a man and a woman. His next move is to go to C-228, which was connected electronically to the server room. A class is underway. He stops at the door. He surveyed the class for a moment. One student recalled what happened next. He looks at everyone and aims at a student in the back of the class. He tries to shoot her twice, but his rifle refuses to work. Lepine aborts this part of the operation and runs to the emergency stairway nearby. Meanwhile, news of an active shooter has spread throughout the school. Instructor Guy Brunel was quoted as saying, "I saw a woman in the distance, hiding her face behind a sheet of paper to protect herself. I realized it was serious." A lecturer from the room next door showed up to inform him that the shooter showed up but could not kill anyone because his rifle was malfunctioning. Said Brunel, "I made all the students come to my side." One of the students locked the door that opened to the hallway, the one in front of which Lepine had been standing. In the emergency landing, Lepine is frantically trying to fix his rifle. A student walked by and heard him saying, "Shit, I'm out of bullets." Most likely unaware of the shooting, the student didn't think anything of it and walked away. When the student saw the injured parties in the photocopier room, he realized that what he heard from Lepine was no joke. He turned around for a second look. Lepine was reloading his rifle. He lifted it in the student's direction. The student ran to the escalator that led to the cafeteria. He heard gunshots from a distance. Lepine returned to C-228. This time around, the door was locked. He shot at the door. Brunel recalled the impact this action made on him. He kept shooting. He wouldn't stop. I was afraid if he made it through the door, he would come over to our side. That's when it occurred to me to make everyone crawl under the false floor. The false floor referred to a layer of floor that protected computer cords from the wear and tear of pedestrian traffic. Brunel gave some of the male students magnetic tapes to throw at Lepine should he have returned. Realizing he would never get in, Lepine walked away. He walked down the hallway where the 3 injured women still resided. He bumped into a woman who was ascending the escalator and making her way to the server room. He shot her. She managed to get up and run to the emergency stairway. She escaped to the 5th floor. Lepine didn't pursue this woman any further. He walked to a counter and reloaded his rifle. He spots a woman hiding underneath it. He saw her and shot. He shot her twice, but missed both times. He walked to the offices of financial services. The employees have already heard about the shootings, and they have taken cover. Mariesla Marie was preparing to leave for the day. Lepine saw that she was about to lock the door of her office. They fought against each other on opposite sides of the door to gain control of the handle. It automatically locked when pushed in. Maries managed to lock the door and keep him out. The problem was, there was a narrow window next to the door. He shot through the window. Maries was hit and died from her wounds. Lepine ran back to the escalator. He prepared his rifle as he made his way to the next floor down. 5:20 p.m. Lepine goes to the cafeteria on the main floor. 100 people are congregated. They have heard that something dangerous has been going on, but they don't know what exactly it consisted of and who was responsible. It was bad enough that the manager had organized an evacuation. He was routing people out the service door. Lepine took aim at a woman in the kitchen named Barbara Maria Klucznik-Widajewicz. Pandemonium ensues. Everybody else scrambles to flee the cafeteria. Lepine makes a beeline for the poly party room, an open storage space. Geneviève Bergeron and Anne-Marie Edouard were hiding there. Lepine spotted the women and killed them both. Lepine left the poly party room and caught sight of 2 students hiding under a table, a man and a woman. He told them to come out. They did, but he didn't shoot them. He left them there in the cafeteria as he left. Lepine walked down the hallway that led to the stationery store. From there he went to the 2nd floor, where he shot the first victims. He walked up the escalator, which had been shut down. Somebody turned it off to slow him down. When he arrived at the 3rd floor, he found that there were still people around. He shot at them, injuring 2 males and a woman. He darted down a narrow hallway, made a left, and arrived 15 feet further into classroom B311. It was now 5:25 p.m. Nobody in B311 was aware of what had been happening 2 floors beneath them. They were listening to student presentations. 3 students were on the stage presenting a final project, Mariesla among them. Marc Lepine burst into the room. He walked up to the stage. He told the men to leave the room. He shot Maries. He turned from her and fired at the students in the first few rows. One student yelled, "Get down!" Several students crouched down to the floor. Some tried to leave through the back door. One of them was Maude Haviernick. Lepine saw her and took aim. He shot her several times until she was killed. Her body was later found in the hallway in front of the door. Lepine was focused on the back of the room. Some students rushed toward the front door. Michelle Richard follows her boyfriend. His intention was not only to escape, but to trigger an alarm to summon assistance. Lepine got an eyeful of Michelle. He killed her with a single bullet. Lepine redirected his attention to all the surviving students and their professor in the room, who were lying on the floor between the long tables. All they could see of Lepine was his legs as he walked about the room. As he canvassed the room, he would peer downward to see who was under the tables. When he spotted a quartet of young women, he aimed at them. He killed Annie Turcotte. He injured the other 3. For whatever reason, he refrained from killing another woman he saw. He changed the clip on his rifle. He climbed up onto a table in the back of the room. He walked from table to table until he got to the front of the room. He continued to shoot. He stepped onto the stage where he shot Maries. She was seriously injured. She was moaning and asking for assistance. If she was hoping that Lepine would finally show some mercy, he would disappoint her in the worst way possible. He pulled out a knife and stabbed her 3 times. She was his last victim. Marc Lepine's mission was not complete, however. To quote one source, he puts his knife, 2 boxes containing 20 bullets each, and his cap on the professor's desk. Then he sits on the stage. He takes off his jacket, wraps it around the barrel of his weapon, and, after saying, "Oh shit," he shoots himself in the head, using the last bullet in the magazine. Another box of 20 bullets is on a chair in front of the classroom near the door. Hence was the conclusion of his bloodbath. The time was 5:30 p.m. Chapter 3. In Memoriam. Geneviève Bergeron. Genevieve's sister Catherine once said of her, she was beautiful and she fascinated guys. Geneviève had a background in the arts, especially music. Her mother was a pianist, and they frequently bonded by playing as a duet. Despite these talents, Geneviève opted for something more practical, that being the sciences. She intended to pursue a career in engineering. Geneviève demonstrated an impressive level of versatility. As Catherine noted, in high school, she's simply good at everything. Math, chemistry, physics, French. She gets 90% and 100% in everything. Though it came easy to her, she was also prepared to work hard to achieve her goals. Preferring to have options, she said to Catherine, "I'll always be able to play music, so I should go into engineering. It's a more secure field." The two sisters were crazy about sports, and it was something over which they bonded. When Geneviève enrolled at Polytechnique, she majored in mechanical engineering. Her father was very proud, as he was a self-taught architect but could not live out his dream due to his lack of official academic credentials. Geneviève was remembered by friends as having a cheerful disposition and being a magnet for friendship. Her father had nothing but high hopes for her, telling her the world was hers. Hélène Coguin. Hélène was studying mechanical engineering and was dedicated to the pursuit with an unwavering focus. When she had free time, she enjoyed going to bars and dancing. As serious as she was about her studies, she wasn't about to miss out on the pleasures of youth. This was before university. She didn't go out at all. All she could bring herself to do was study. Becoming an engineer was everything to her, and she wanted to use that background to help people where possible. Despite being so focused on academics, she still had a cheerful temperament that was appealing to all who met her. She befriended Diane Gagnon during their second year of high school. Diane recalled what she loved so much about Hélène. What I loved about her was that she was so funny. She liked to laugh. She was very dynamic, very cerebral. Yes, she already had an engineer inside her. Diane described how Hélène fit into the academic environment. Someone who wasn't complicated, not a leader, but not a follower either. Just someone who took her place in a group and was liked by everyone. It was easy to communicate with Hélène. She was very nice. Contemplating a specialty for her post-Polytechnique endeavors, Hélène said that she wanted to build bridges. She intended to complete a master's degree. According to her mother, she had already received job offers, including from a firm in the Greater Toronto area. Natalie Croteau. Natalie Croteau was remembered as sociable, enterprising, and immersed in a great deal of activity. She was a member of the Air Cadets and became a member of the organizing committee for the graduation ball at her high school. She was very conscientious about her studies and usually earned the top grades in her class. She was especially fond of science. It didn't bother her that this might attract the label of nerd. As a friend recalled, she didn't mind. When she wanted to do something, she just did it. Her friend said Natalie was a woman who, quote-unquote, is a good listener, has a warm heart, and is always ready to help. Learning was meaningful for Natalie. As a friend put it, Natalie wanted to, quote, learn in order to understand, learn in order to accomplish, end quote. Barbara Dagnon. Barbara's given name was inspired by a poem by Jacques Prévert. Translated from French, it goes, remember, Barbara, it was raining non-stop on Brest that day, and you were walking, smiling, content, delighted, dripping, under the rain. Barbara was born on March 2nd, 1967 in England, where it was indeed raining, as it typically does that time of year. She wasn't intimidated by being a woman in a male-dominated field on or off campus. She worked as an assistant to her father as he trained students at his mechanical engineering lab. She was paid for her work, gained valuable experience, and was satisfied by knowing she had chosen the right career. She also had a passion for music and was an accomplished violinist and pianist. She would later learn stand-up bass as well. Barbara was a quiet girl who wasn't keen on noisy nightclubs. She had a boyfriend named Eric Alexis, who was also an engineering student. They were very much in love. Everything was looking up for Barbara Dagnon as she left her apartment for Polytechnique the morning of December 6, 1989. Anne-Marie Edouard. One of Anne-Marie's favorite pastimes was skiing. She combined this with her willingness to help others. On December 3, 1989, she participated in a skiathlon to raise funds for cancer research. She was serious enough about skiing to train with the Université de Montréal's ski team. She excelled in other sports as well. Anne-Marie was remembered by her loved ones as being a, quote, force of nature, unquote. They recalled that she was a jack of all trades with an inclination to try just about anything: whitewater kayaking, survival camping in deep woods, rock climbing, horseback riding, sailing. She was good at juggling multiple activities at once. Anne-Marie worked hard and played hard, but she knew when to take it easy. To quote her brother Jimmy, she had a peaceful soul and radiated a profound serenity conducive to introspection. Aside from her athletic and outdoor pursuits, she also enjoyed reading and writing. She filled 3 diaries and wrote many letters. She was bilingual due to having a father who was fluent in English and a francophone mother. She also learned Spanish. Any available free time in her schedule was spent at the YMCA in Pointe-Claire, assisting disabled children. Her career ambition was to work in chemical engineering. In the closing days of summer 1989, she wrote the following in the guest book of her family house in New Brunswick. "This place will always bring back the memory of wonderful days. The summer of my 16 years. With my dear Aunt Helene, long hours scanning the beaches of Parley Beach, attractive men, the sea. This week was also fun, but calm and relaxing in front of the fire. I loved it." Maude Haviernick. Maude, 29 years old, was comparably mature among the other students at Polytechnique. Her original ambition was to establish a career in the arts. Her specialty was in sculpting. She parlayed her creative abilities into interior decorating and got an undergraduate degree in environmental design. She discovered that her diploma wouldn't take her far in that field. She found out that one would have to be an engineer in order to have any authority when it comes to environmental design. Hence, her decision to study engineering at Polytechnique, specializing in materials engineering. She was married to the love of her life, Serge Gagnon. In the township of Laval, they settled in a house. One room was set aside as a studio in which Maude could work on her artistic projects. She was the first of her immediate family to go to university. They were very hopeful, proud, and supportive. Barbara Maria Klucznik-Widajewicz. Barbara Maria was not a student at Polytechnique in December 1989. She was a student, but was attending classes at the Faculty of Nursing at Université de Montréal. She didn't need to enroll at Polytechnique to become an engineer. She already achieved that goal in her native Poland in 1983. Barbara was nicknamed Baja by her family. She had many interests and talents. She enjoyed jazz. She was a talented painter. She was a sponge for knowledge and wanted to learn everything. She got married while she and her husband were still in school in 1981. Due to political strife, the couple decided to flee to Canada. Her husband, Witold, visited Montreal during the 1976 Summer Olympics and grew fond of the city. Sponsored by his aunt, they moved to Montreal on April 23, 1987. Witold was a doctor, and Barbara decided she wanted to help people too, so she decided to become a nurse. In 1988, the couple had a daughter named Sarah. Witold and Barbara were so busy, they often ate their meals at the Université de Montréal campus. The one they met at most often was the cafeteria of École Polytechnique. Mariesla Marie. Marie was an employee of Polytechnique. She studied computer science at Cégep de Maisonneuve in her early 20s. She was hired at Polytechnique first to work in research sciences, then in the finance department. It was here that she met the man with whom she fell in love, Jean-François Larrivée, most often referred to and addressed as Jeff. They met when he rushed to the financial services office to explain why he was late in paying his tuition. It was love at first sight, with Marie's blushing and Jeff taken with her, quote, magnificent blue eyes, end quote. Before long, they were inseparable. He recalled the moment when they became an item. We sit down, perfectly still, in front of a television that we don't turn on. At the end of this very beautiful moment, I look at her and I say, "Do you want to be my girlfriend?" Her eyes filled with joy. She says, "Yes." I push a little more. "How about you? Are you going to ask me?" She says, "Do you want to be my boyfriend?" I say yes. They moved in together in spring of 1987. They got married on August 12th, 1989. They honeymooned in Punta Cana. They couldn't have been happier. Jeff always knew when she was happy. As he put it, she had a very unique way of sharing her feelings. Her face would simply glow from the emotion she was feeling. Mariesla Marie. Maries was rebellious in the sense that she had no intentions of conforming to society's expectations of women. Her ambition as a teenager was to be an astronaut. Being a girl guide usually ends in girlhood, but at 15, Maries advanced to ranger. This position brought with it leadership opportunities and the added responsibilities that came with them. This suited Maries just fine. She was once enrolled at College Regina Assumpta at Montreal, which was a very strict environment where she was required to wear a uniform. This was too much for her to take, and she convinced her parents to transfer her to a more lenient educational institution. Eventually, she immersed herself in punk rock and the Montreal New Wave scene. She made her own clothes. She enjoyed playing many sports. She once enrolled in a military camp, but she injured her knee during one of the exercises. She also disliked the disciplinarian management style of the camp's administration. When it came time to choose a post-secondary institution, she initially enrolled at École des Hautes Études Commerciales. She was disappointed in the program because it didn't provide the creative professional environment she wanted. She changed her major and enrolled at Polytechnique to study materials engineering. It was there where she met her boyfriend, Benoit. She was in love and looking forward to a prosperous future. Henri Lemay. Anne-Marie figured out there was a way to parlay engineering into a way to help people with disabilities. She assisted a young man who lost the use of his legs as he went through the process of trying to regain his mobility. She got a first-hand look at how prosthesis and mechanical mobility aids provide valuable assistance for people who have been immobilized. Doctors provide their care, but it is engineers who design the equipment on which such patients rely in the long term. Anne-Marie was remembered for being helpful and compassionate to the less fortunate. She was an extrovert who avoided conflict. She was always thoughtful, mindful of people's feelings, and keen to avoid doing or saying anything hurtful. Her academic record did not qualify her for medical school, so she enrolled in the mechanical engineering program at Polytechnique. She met a man there, an engineering student named Laurent. They were very much in love and looking ahead to their future together. Sonia Pelletier. Sonia was a very bright and hard-working student. She received scholarships and won academic contests. She was the pride of her family. What people remembered about her most was her ambition, her incisive mind, and her exceptional talents. To quote her friend Sylvia Harrison, a memorable person, the kind of person you don't meet very often in your life. They met in a math class while earning credits to enroll at Polytechnique. In Sonia's spare time, she enjoyed sketching. She mostly enjoyed drawing portraits of the people around her using charcoal. She also had a penchant for sewing. She abandoned these pursuits once she began her studies at Polytechnique. Her scholastic efforts there were so commendable, she received an award of excellence. By then, she had already accepted a position in her field. Getting her diploma was only a formality at that point. In July 2019, Sonia's hometown of St-Arnoault renamed a park in honor of her. Michelle Richard. Michelle, nicknamed Mimi by her friends, made a name for herself as a teenager. She became involved in projects to benefit community groups. She was also involved with the Cadets Corps 1937 in Loch Magentic. She also joined a brass band. She was especially fond of playing the trumpet, flute, and piano. When she moved to Montreal, she was conscientious about maintaining close ties to her family and friends back home. Her Aunt Cecile remembered her as charming, warm, gentle, radiant, and with a love of life. Cecile said, whenever she was here, we were all under her spell. Her aunt recalled how Michelle evaluated her academic and vocational options. She was smart. She wanted to pursue her studies in order to make a difference. It was something that would often come up. She wanted to help, to improve things. She eventually decided on a career in metallurgical engineering. Also in attendance at Polytechnique was her boyfriend Stéphane. She anticipated getting engaged in spring of 1990. Annie SaintArnoault. In December 1989, as Annie was finishing her degree, she was weighing career options. She was offered a position at Alcan Smelters in Saint-Arnoault. She could also accompany her brother, Serge, as he was about to embark on a trip to Africa as a missionary to plan community projects. Whatever she decided on, she wanted to combine humanitarian work with science. It was her career objective. Annie's best friend, Sonia Beauregard, remembered Annie as curious and thoughtful. Even as a child, she put more thought and work into her projects than most other children. She enjoyed writing poetry in her early years and was a member of a wind symphony. She dabbled in theater in university, even going so far as to create an original play. She joined the science club in high school. She was the only girl. The principal congratulated her on representing feminists in the club, but she insisted she only joined because she was passionate about science. Her classmate France Chrétien at Polytechnique was quoted as saying, "She would take our arm while she was talking to us. She liked touching people. She was a very expressive woman, always in a good mood, always ready to help others, to tell them that she loved them. Truly a woman with a very big heart." Sonia Beauregard recalled one conversation she had with Annie. From a very young age, she was an idealist altruist. The Dalai Lama had nothing on her. She even had a kind of naivete. For her, there was kindness in everyone. While I would say, "No, Annie, some people are just plain dangerous." Annie Turcotte. Annie was remembered as a fun-loving girl. Before the age of emojis, she placed a smiley face on her mailbox. Her older brother Donald recalled some of the good times they had together by referring to what their brother Christian used to say. He used to tell me, we would get the giggles. They would be unable to talk because they'd be laughing so hard. Despite her cheerful and jocular demeanor, Annie was as serious as a heart attack when it came to her studies. To quote Donald, she was studying materials engineering and was very concerned with everything that had to do with nature and the environment. She was a competitive swimmer in her hometown. She also gave free swimming lessons at a summer camp for disabled children. Donald commented on the effect she had on children. Every time we went somewhere, they would all be on top of her. She was incredible with them. Chapter 4. Mercy Astride the Grave. The following are highlights from an episode of the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation's program The Fifth Estate, called Legacy of Pain. Several survivors of the shooting and family members of the deceased are interviewed.
Good evening. 10 years ago, 14 women were shot dead at a university in Montreal, sending shockwaves through the nation. Nothing had prepared any of us for something like this. Marc Lepine's hate crime left behind a profound and painful human tragedy, but he left other things too. There was the list he'd prepared of other women, many of them well known in Quebec, whom he had also planned to kill. My name was on that list. There was the mystery, as there always is in cases of sudden mass murder, about what in Lepine's life had led him to pick up a gun and attack complete strangers. And there were the other human lives ended and damaged, the ones most Canadians have never heard about, but who, beyond any doubt, were also victims of Marc Lepine. Tonight on the Fifth Estate, a special full edition report on a legacy of pain. A silent gathering in a park in Montreal. Women's names emblazoned on the lawn. These people have waited 10 years for this, a lasting tribute to what they've lost and never want forgotten. On December 6, 1989, Nadine and Sylvie Haviernick lost their sister Maude. Just 2 days before, Nadine had a haunting dream about it.
Maude was sitting just beside me, and all of a sudden she flew up in the air, and I was just seeing her face turning around and coming towards me, and she told me 3 times, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die, I'm gonna die, and I woke up.
Jean-François Larrivé, who everyone calls Jeff, lost his wife. They'd been married only 3 months. Jeff looks to heaven now to keep their union alive.
I prayed every night. I pray for the past 10 years. And basically what I do is I ask the Lord to receive her in his kingdom of heaven. I would be happy if I could receive a telegram from God saying, Jeff, can you please stop praying for this? This is done.
Suzanne Edward lost her only daughter, Anne-Marie, who, like all the women killed that day, had life by the tail. An accomplished athlete, linguist, and musician.
We used to play music together, and I used to play the piano. She played the piano very well as well, but she played the guitar. I was a happy woman. I'm no longer a happy woman. I cannot possibly be a happy woman after this.
This, the slaying of 14 women at l'École Polytechnique in Montreal, an event so loathsome, so unimaginable. It's taken 10 years to be able to come to terms with its sheer brutality. It was about 4 p.m. when Marc Lepine, wearing jeans and military-style boots and carrying an assault rifle in a plastic garbage bag, headed for the engineering school, a place he'd visited many times before. It was the last day of classes before midterm exams, and the school was quieter than usual. In class 311, students were giving oral presentations. St-Arneault was one of 2 teachers present.
A team of 3 students just finished presenting their project.
After having spent close to an hour in the registrar's office, just waiting, Lepine told a clerk, he started on his gruesome pilgrimage.
Suddenly, a very strange man came in. He had a shotgun with his hand on the trigger. He was 2 meters in front of me. He didn't appear to us to be a madman. He ordered to the men to the students and to the professors to go on the right side of the class and the girls on the left side.
Before shooting, Lepine shouted, "I hate feminists." All 9 women in the class were struck down, 6 dead, 3 wounded. A university campus was suddenly transformed into a war zone.
There were emergency vehicles, urgence santé, police cruisers, I believe. There were all sorts of lights, there was all sorts of action.
Lynn Moore of the Montreal Gazette was one of scores of reporters on the scene.
There were people in the stretchers. It wasn't clear if they were injured or if they were dead.
Jeff Larrivée was also there that night. He'd come to pick up his wife, an employee at the school, and soon was caught up in the nightmare.
Nobody was Marie's and all the stretchers going out. I began to be more scared, you know, so I was yelling her name like this to the window, Marie's, like the window were not open, but maybe she could hear me. And nobody was at the window.
He was walking slowly, really calmly.
Soon news of a crazed gunman started trickling out, sending anxious families into shock. But no one knew anything for sure.
All the night that I was listening to the news, you keep hoping and hoping and hoping something like that couldn't happen to my sister. It's impossible. So, and you're still thinking that no, it's impossible. But on the other hand, I was thinking about my dream, and I was very scared about it.
Hankering to know more, Lynn Moore saw a plainclothes policeman going in and followed close behind. She'd be the only reporter to get in.
As soon as we were in the building, he went one way and I went another, sort of up the stairs. On the second floor, there was an open area, sort of a common area, a lounge. People sort of ghost-like walking around the edges of the lounge.
Knowing something horrific and evil had happened, Moore went on, came to a classroom, and looked in.
And in that classroom, on the floor, there were 2 bodies. One was male, and he had a rifle across his legs. The other was a young, blonde girl. And they were both lying there relatively close together in a pool of blood.
The young girl was Mariesla Leclerc, daughter of police spokesman Pierre Leclerc.
She was wearing a sweater, and it's funny about that sweater because that's what I focused on. For some reason, I remember thinking, okay, that morning, was it her mother, her father, her friend, her coloc that said, you know, really, you should wear that sweater, it's cold out.
Mariesla Leclerc had been shot but only wounded. Hearing her cry for help, Lepine finished her off with his hunting knife, stabbing her repeatedly in the heart. He was then heard muttering, "Oh shit," before using the last bullet in his gun on himself. His favorite swear word was later found scribbled on a student paper, like a discarded shred of rage. Jeff Larrivée, himself a graduate of Polytechnique, had been standing outside for 4 hours when he noticed a former teacher come out of the building.
So I asked him, "Did you see Marie's? Do you know something, you know?" And he looked at me with that look that I cannot describe. And when I saw his look, then I knew that something bad, very bad happened. And he said nothing, he just said nothing, basically.
Tension in that building was incredible.
Lynn Moore's journey into the heart of darkness was about to abruptly come to an end. She was on the phone to her editor when one of the school's security guards spotted her.
I could just see him just get really tense and angry, and he says, "Are you crazy? Don't you know they're killing women here tonight?"
Late that night, the bodies of the 14 women were all put in one room, though names of the victims were still to be released. Frantic relatives were now coming apart. Sylvie Haviernick, the eldest in her family, was amongst them.
All the family members were in the same room, and we knew that we were waiting for bad news. And 3:30, around that time, the door opened, the policewoman and the policeman stand up, and they said, there's only one name to say.
To identify?
Just one name to communicate. And I stood up and I said no, and it was Maude. So, and after that I forgot everything.
Bright young women like Mimi Richard, now reduced to a grisly notation in the morgue ledger, mort violente, violent death. The horror of their own deaths etched on their faces like a broken promise.
I didn't recognize my sister.
Sylvie Haviernick was shocked to see how all the victims had the same withered look.
They look old.
With the same impression.
The same expression in their faces. Looking my sisters, I knew that she's dying with pain. She's dying with fear, and she was alone. She's dying alone. So, and this hurt me a lot.
Lepine's rampage had been meticulously thought out and cruelly executed, often telling the men to get out of the way to better shoot the women. But it wasn't supposed to include the finance department, where Jeff's wife worked. Fate would prove particularly cruel to 25-year-old Mariesla, who, hearing a gunman was loose, rushed to lock the door.
But that door, that damn door, you have to open the door and then take the handle from outside and twist it and check if it's locked, And she kind of opened the door to check if the door was locked. At the moment that she opened the door, Marc Lepine took the handle trying to keep the door open, and Mariesla with his two hands was trying to close the door on the other side, and they fight like this for a certain time, I don't know, maybe a couple of seconds. Finally, Mariesla succeeded to close the door. So, basically she's safe right there, but there was a window on the side of the door, these little windows with the little metallic wire inside. And he took his gun and he shot through the window, a couple of shots. And he killed her at the first shot.
We enter the world and mind of Marc Lepine. The Montreal Massacre has changed the lives of many people, as it haunts many more, mine included. From the time I found my name on Lepine's hit list, I have felt the need to get inside the man's head, find out what could have possibly motivated such hatred. So today, a former friend and roommate of Lepine's, Eric Cossette, and his twin sister Annick and I have come to the place where Lepine devised his bloody deed. 10 years ago, Eric and Lepine shared this apartment, now occupied by other young men.
I remember his desk, his computer. He liked so much computer machine.
Books, huh?
Well, yeah, it's true. A lot of books everywhere. We read a lot. Yeah.
What did he read?
Everything. Literature, science fiction, a lot.
And he read poetry?
Yeah, also. Yeah.
It's funny, this is open, and then suddenly I remember looking at it and saying, you don't have many clothes. Huh? He had, what, 2 pair of pants?
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
I remember that now, so vividly, and making fun of this. And he said, well, I don't need much.
He didn't take pleasure in many of the things that normal people would take pleasure in.
Mark Turner was 14 and in high school when he met a gangly kid called Marc Lepine, a boy who was good in school and liked to joke.
He definitely had a great mind. He was very knowledgeable on many subjects, ranging from history to technology, He was fascinated by many, many things, and he just loved to talk to you about a subject that he knew something about.
The eldest of two children, Lepine was the son of Lies Garbi, an Algerian expatriate who dabbled in mutual funds. And Monique Lepine, a nurse by profession who'd once been a nun, not the most typical of households perhaps, but one who could put on a good show.
Lies was a big show-off, money-wise.
Louise Lepine was married to Monique Lepine's brother, Bernard.
If he would take you to a restaurant or something, bring on best, Dom Perignon and what the heck.
But in the Garbi-Lepine household, it was not all wine and roses. Eric and Annick Cossette remember their friend Marc as being secretive and closed.
If we would have told Marc Lepine's story a day before the massacre, everybody would have pitied him. But then he commits this massacre and the next day he's a monster to everyone. Nobody wants to hear the story. What he did was so terrible. But this was a youngster suffering, deep suffering, and there's nothing we could do for him.
We just had the impression that he was, I guess, a bit different, not as sociable as some people, and I guess a bit closed, and you probably had the impression somewhere that he was hiding something, but I mean, if he had the capacity to kill 14 women, it's something that he kept very well hidden.
One thing Marc Lepine kept well hidden was his real name, Gamil Garbi. At age 13, he abandoned his father's name in favor of his mother's. It was a clue to what was happening in his family. After 8 years of marriage, Monique Lepine filed for divorce. She's refused to be interviewed, and no one has been able to locate Garbi. The only way to get an insight into their lives is through these legal documents, publicly available at the Montreal courthouse. They contain lengthy testimony from Monique Lepine, her sister Pierrette, as well as Lies Garbi. Whenever events this shocking occur, the question always is, how can this happen? In the case of Marc Lepine, the first clue to what motivated such unmitigated rage can be found in the 1976 divorce proceedings between Lepine's parents. The testimony contained here tells a harrowing story. Tonight, using the verbatim court transcripts, we recreate some of the testimony from the divorce hearing.
He's a very cruel man who didn't seem able to control his emotions, who raised his hand to me and the kids for the least little thing.
I never hit, pushed, whatever.
You never hit your wife?
I never hit my wife.
You never hit your children?
Never.
He would hit my son full in the face, which would leave marks sometimes for a week at a time.
Judge Jeanne Lemay Warren presided over the case.
It's terrible for a child of that age. He was already 12. He even had his nose bleeding at a certain point. And it was forbidden for the mother to go and take him and console him. So that's very, very cruel.
Louise Lepine remembers the cruel treatment her nephew and niece were subjected to.
His childhood was pretty bad. Him and his sister were locked up in their bedrooms with a little potty, a table and 2 chairs and their orange juice. I remember when I saw the door locked and the potty and the chairs, and I couldn't believe it. I just couldn't believe it.
Did you ask about that?
I asked, yeah. I said, what for? I was told it because Lies wanted to have peace and quiet while he had his gentlemanly brunch, all dressed up, all stiffed up in his white collar, and he even had the old shirts with the, I'm looking for the term.
Cufflinks.
With the cufflinks, yeah. He had the shirts with the cufflinks and all spruced up, and until then he used to leave the house and then the kids would come out. But I remember the look on their faces sometimes if we'd be at a Christmas party or something.
What was the look on their faces?
They were scared. scared of their dad.
From court testimony, it seems the whole Lepine family was afraid of Garbi. Monique Lepine's sister testified that, even separated from his wife, Garbi managed to spread his terror. She recounted one family dinner.
My sister was cooking the meal. He took the casserole and threw it outside, pot and all. My sister went out to get the casserole. He went out, grabbed her, hit her against the stone wall several times in front of the children.
As Lepine grew into adulthood, he became more and more reclusive. Few things excited him, except war movies and war games. His friend remembers an outing Lepine organized in this adult playground.
Just to see him getting into this type of game was sort of unusual for him to be so openly happy about doing something. To see him do some running and jumping and trying to kill as many people as he could with the paintballs was sort of eerie, considering what he did later on.
Okay, he's hit! Elliot Layton is the author of Hunting Humans, one of the first studies on mass murderers. A leading Canadian anthropologist and observer of humans by profession, Layton says we shouldn't dismiss these crimes as merely random events. They tell us a lot about the society we live in. The fact that Marc Lepine singled out women, how significant is that?
Well, they single out from the dominant tensions and frustrations in a society and incorporate them into their own thinking. So sometimes it's racist, sometimes, as with Lepine, it's sexist, but whatever the tensions prevalent in a society are at that time, they're likely to be reflected in the thinking of these kinds of killers. So this occurred at a time when women were finally breaking loose the shackles that had tied them for 10,000 years. It's not surprising that out of that tension in the general society would come some lone killer who blamed them for everything.
Court documents show that in the Lepine household, Lies Garbi made sure that his wife would not break from her shackles, forcing her to abandon her career and work for him instead.
I was a two-finger typist. In any case, he forced me to work at all hours, and every time I made a typo, he would hit me in the back of the head. Sometimes it made me dizzy. He let me know that a woman was not equal to a man, that a woman was a man's servant.
The judge eventually granted Monique Lepine a divorce and the custody of the two children.
It's not only being slapped in the face, how many times, it doesn't matter. It's the whole atmosphere of violence and of non-respect of a woman, of his mother.
The father's lessons were not lost on the son, who by the time he was 20 was also denigrating women. Posting things like this, a bad play on an anti-drinking and driving ad. Women drivers are criminal.
I think he probably did feel rejected from women, I guess because he had never had any. Perhaps his fear comes from the fact that women give you emotions, and he was not an emotional type of guy. I did talk to him about that. I mean, I've asked him, like, how would you feel if your mother died and you went to the funeral? You wouldn't feel like expressing emotions. He says, oh no. There was no way that he would show any emotion. He'd be as hard as stone.
By all accounts, Lepine had a distant relationship with his mother, who, according to friends of the family, had her own difficulties expressing emotion.
She was very exuberant at times and a lot of fun. And other times she'd be very in a closed shell and be very cold.
What was it like in his family?
So it was very severe.
Severe?
His mother didn't talk a lot in that time. She was like very, it was austere.
Mm-hmm. An austere mother, an abusive father, a bitter and frustrated young man. A sad story, but not one that necessarily adds up to a mass killer. What makes Marc Lepine become Marc Lepine? Experts say that there will always be a part of mystery in all this. But there's also a certain arithmetic in what makes a mass murderer. It takes an obsessive, narcissistic personality that blames others. Lepine had that. It takes an abusive childhood. Lepine had that. It takes an accumulation of failures. He had that. In the fall of 1989, at the eve of his 25th birthday, Lepine had been rejected by the army, rejected by women, had no job, and was about to get his unemployment money cut off. Worse, he'd had a dream that he thought he'd been robbed of. Lepine had always wanted to study engineering here at Polytechnique. He'd even told his friends about it. But in the spring of '89, he was turned down. In Lepine's mind, women had usurped his rightful place.
There's a long series of events which begins with a depressed, vulnerable, confused person who feels he's failing in the social order, who begins to incubate this campaign of vengeance and the fantasy of it, and then there is one triggering incident that finally decides he's going to do it.
So I remember this balcony.
Annick Cossette has never forgotten Marc Lepine standing on this balcony 10 years ago. It was September '89. Eric was leaving for South America for a year. She had never seen her brother's roommate so devastated before.
The whole time watching us, and he looked sad. He looked very sad, and I was driving and looked around, and he was still here, and he followed us till the last second. That was it. And then I this week actually, I was at home, and then I said, "Oh my God." Maybe he probably knew that they wouldn't see one another again, that he would die.
On December 6, 1989, the very day of the mass killings, Lepine wrote to Mark Turner, who'd also been a roommate for a time, advising him the phone was still in his name. No emotion, hard-nosed to the end.
It just goes to show you that he really had planned everything, and he had made sure that all his points were covered.
Before Marc Lepine, it was rare for mass murderers to be so young. But this was one young man who seems to have been thinking vengeful thoughts for a long time.
I think it was either me or our roommate asked him what he thought about suicide. And he said, well, I don't want to take part in this discussion, only that if I ever did commit suicide, I would take as many people as I could with me.
When we come back, how the killing continued long after Marc Lepine lay dead. This is the ritual that every year marks the anniversary of the Montreal Massacre, a solemn concert that helps us mourn. But perhaps still not enough. For this tragedy has created yet more tragedy in its wake, if at times less spectacular. The bodies of the 14 women were brought here to the Montreal morgue. They all had signs of multiple bullet wounds. Some had been shot as many as 9 times. The spectacle of so many beautiful young women being senselessly murdered seems to have been too much for the mortician on duty here that night. After years of service, that man never worked at the morgue again. His departure was the first sign that Marc Lepine would make many other victims. Victims largely unknown, sometimes unlikely.
The number of victims that a tragedy like this makes is innumerable. It just snowballs.
Suzanne Edwards' daughter Anne-Marie once had a good friend, Hélène Tinel. Also an engineering student, she was at the head of her class at the University of Toronto, a talented girl with lots of ambition.
She said to me a few weeks back that she died also on December 6, 1989, with Anne-Marie. The girl came apart, and she has had depression over depression over depression and has never really recovered. And I asked her if she wanted to be part of this interview, and I said, Hélène, you know, tell your story. It's so important. It's an homage to the girls, and she said, no, I can't, but you tell them. She said, you tell them how difficult it is.
How difficult it is something Thérèse Martin knows well. Her husband walked out on her and their 2 daughters years ago. But before Mimi's death, there'd been good news. Her ex-husband, Michel Richard, had reconciled with their daughter. Mimi was about to be married and wanted her father to be there, but days later she was killed. Already a troubled man, Michel Richard committed suicide almost exactly a year later, on December 14th. Troubled men could be counted by the dozens here at Polytechnique in the months that followed the killings.
They were deeply upset, and many of them told us that if we knew what was happening, we were able to go to risking our lives and disarm this madman.
So they did feel guilty?
They felt guilty, and they were absolutely in a state of shock too.
Sarto Blais, who was just about to graduate and get a job, was one of the students affected.
He was not the same person. He was terribly shocked and high depression, and nobody was able to stop him crying.
9 months later, Sarto Blais hung himself in the bathroom of his apartment. He left no explanations. In Montreal, his suicide went virtually unnoticed. But 1,000 miles away, the tragedy would ripple onto these shores. Sarto Blais came from Chandler, a small community in Gaspésie, where his parents still lived. Less than a year later, Gilles and Micheline Blais followed in their son's path, committing suicide together. Dr. Leblanc was the local coroner. His report says that the Blais were unable to carry on. He also blames the killings at Polytechnique for their son's fatal depression. Seven years after the massacre, in a dark and dejected corner of Montreal, there would be another death. In a part of town where emblems issue stark warnings to children. A young woman would squander her life in an apartment strewn with dirty clothes and used syringes. Ambulances were called to the scene. The young woman was Nadia Garbi, Marc Lepine's sister, dead from a drug overdose.
His sister was quite different than him in the sense that he was, I guess, sort of perceived as somebody who was very intellectual and socially outcast, whereas his sister was more with the in crowd. So obviously there was a big difference between the two.
There's also a stark difference how the two troubled siblings dealt with the depths of their despair. Both died by their own hand. But on March 1st, 1996, Nadia Garbi, aged 28, died alone in a junkie's pad of cardiac arrest. This piece was written by Jeff Larrivée for the woman he lost only 3 months and 3 weeks after they were married.
It was the most beautiful day of my life, and I realized it even more after Marie's died.
10 years later, Jeff has surprising things to say about the man who took it all away from him.
I didn't spend time aiding him, trying to kill him in my dream or make him pay for what he did. I didn't spend time doing that. What I believe, he was born well and alive and normal, and I believe that the external influence, maybe friends, his father, things happen in his life to make him very aggressive toward the people, especially towards women.
Yeah, I hate him. I hating him in the beginning. Which right did he have to do something like that? Destroy how many families? Yes, I hate him. Yeah, and I will never, 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 never gonna be able to forgive.
Yeah.
Never.
Maude Haviernick now has her name etched in steel and stone. The park commemorating the 14 women, called Place du 6 Décembre. Situated at the foot of the University of Montreal, it features only the names of the 14 women, cryptically inscribed, curved like silver wings.
But that conscientious effort to have to decipher the names is interesting. It creates a participation on the part of the viewer to figure it out.
The inscriptions are designed to encourage people to decipher and remember these names. Remember the heedless violence that once wrenched innocence from a nation and visited such heartache on so many.
This is a segment from the CBC's primetime news program, The National. Natalie Croteau, a survivor of the Polytechnique shooting, gave an interview in which she describes her work as an advocate for gun control.
At Polytechnique now, they call it the Order of the White Rose.
J'invite maintenant Madame Natalie Croteau.
For me, and probably for many people here, you symbolize the interrupted dreams of my classmates.
A scholarship for female engineering students to help reach a potential that 14 murdered young women could not. The 14 white roses are for them. Natalie Croteau, the survivor, champion of those lives lost and those about to flourish.
I would like to take your hand. I hold your hand so that this closeness between us, despite the passage of time, will make you share our innocence.
You actively held their hands, and looking on, I wondered what that meant and what the purpose of that was.
For me, it's the reminder of where we were 30 years ago. We were standing up, alive, in front of him just before he shot. And I think that's a very strong symbol, to be alive, standing up with them.
How she survived, she'll never understand. Shot 3 times in the head and legs.
I remember falling on the floor. I remember hearing his footsteps leaving the classroom. I tried to get out because I was able to stand up. I walked to the door. I opened it just the smallest I can and with no noise. And he was there to watch us,
yeah.
to block the entry. And then I came back. I told the girls, faites-les mortes.
Play dead.
Play dead. And we waited. I was so terrified by seeing somebody killing my friends.
She was speaking out from the very start.
That I ask every girl in Quebec and everywhere in the world who wants to be an engineer to keep this idea in their mind, because engineering is a great profession.
Generous with the next generation even right away, but also eventually deeply angry and deep in another cause, gun control, starting with the gun used to shoot her.
What would surprise Canadians right now about that weapon?
That is still an unrestricted weapon. In some states, in United States, right now, they are more protected. They have a better gun control than what we have here.
There aren't many families or survivors who talk so openly. Most are private in their grief, but in the gun control battle, Natalie Croteau has company.
Most of the assault weapons in Canada are restricted, like the 6-hour MCX, which was...
Heidi Rathjen. She escaped bullets that day, won't call herself a survivor, though. A fighter? Yes. Soon after graduation, she formed the Coalition for Gun Control.
In my head, I was doing it for 6 months. Turned into a year, so it ended up being 6 years.
And that was supposed to be it, because after all, in 1995, the Firearms Act came into being, a direct response to the massacre. The act decreed the licensing and registration of firearms.
When the law passed in December of '95, we had a party, and the families were there celebrating with us. And they said this is probably the most concrete, meaningful homage to the memory of the 14 victims, because they know that it will save more lives than those that were taken on that fateful day.
All those in favor of the motion will please rise.
Celebrations didn't last. The long gun registry disappeared under Stephen Harper. Other features of the act were dismantled too. So Heidi Rathjen is again surrounded by her gun control files, getting angrier and sadder all the time.
The witnesses and the families of the victims just want the death of their sisters and daughters not to be in vain. So 30 years is a long time. And for a lot of them, it's starting to be too long.
Imagine the long gun registry would have been a building. Nobody would have destroyed a building because it's an asset. Information system is an asset, and we let the government destroy an asset. From an engineer point of view, it's incredible.
She's angry at Stephen Harper too, but then, in a way, angrier at Justin Trudeau. She believed the laws would get passed when he had a majority government. She even joined the Firearms Advisory Committee, but she quit a few months ago in frustration so she could speak freely.
And I think I had to publicly say no, it was not enough. And I cannot act as if I'm happy. I am not. I remember there's a picture of myself and Mr. Trudeau on the 25th anniversary where I believed.
You don't believe anymore?
I hope.
I humbly give you my hope and my faith in you. Merci à Polytechnique.
She admits to a loneliness about all this, about bearing witness again and again and continuing to fight without yet winning. 30 years is a long time to talk about hope.
There were fresh signs the Liberals intend to do something on gun control in yesterday's throne speech.
The government will crack down on gun crime, banning military-style assault rifles and taking steps to introduce a buyback program.
Encouraging words for gun control advocates, but it's the facts that worry them. While fully automatic weapons are banned, with the right certification, you can get most semi-automatic handguns and a wide range of military-style rifles. More than 300,000 Canadians already own weapons like this. So there's talk of a buyback program. Many of Canada's mass shootings, including Dawson College in Montreal in 2006, Moncton in 2014, and the Quebec City mosque shooting in 2017, involved legally obtained firearms.
I'm going to leave you with an interview Marc Lepine's mother, Monique Lepine, did for Canadian Christian television program 100 Huntley Street. She was promoting her book entitled Aftermath. The mother of Marc Lepine tells the story of her life before and after the Montreal Massacre. Thank you for listening to Human Monsters. Bye for now.
Tell us about that day, December 6, 1989. How did it start that day?
Well, that day I had organized a 3-day session for nurses because I'm a nurse myself. And actually I went to work and I did my first day of training. And when I arrived home during the evening, I opened my TV and watched the news. And then they were telling us that this killer, you know, had gone to École Polytechnique of Montreal, killed 14 young women, and killed himself right after. And I was so shocked by this news. And I remember very well it was a Wednesday evening, because I was a Christian for 9 years, and I always went to a prayer meeting. And that evening, I asked to pray for the mother of this young man, not knowing that it was me.
You asked in that Bible study?
I was pushed to ask for the prayer for this mother.
Why? Because, I mean, so many people focus on the victims, the people that have been attacked.
Yeah.
And so why did you want to pray specifically
Well, maybe because of my profession. I'm a nurse, you know, we're people of compassion. And I'm always, you know, in situation attracted by the people that lives the pain, the suffering. And maybe that's why. It's my training to look after people. So the next day I went to my training again, and I did my full day. And then I decided to go by my office during the evening, and that's when I saw everybody there. And normally nobody is there after 6, but everybody was there, a lot of turmoil in the place, and all the staff was there, and I was wondering what was going on. And then I went to my office, and I had these messages, and one from my brother actually. And my brother never calls me at work, you know, and I was wondering even more what happened. And then I dialed his number, and I hear him say on the phone, "We think it is Marc." And I said, "What?" As soon as I said what, my director came with 2 policemen dressed in civilian clothes. And then from then on, my life was not mine anymore.
Did they think that maybe you knew what was going to happen that day?
Well, maybe, you know, but I never saw any signs of this drama, you know.
Yeah.
Nobody did, actually. The guys he was living, you know, with these students, they didn't know. The people at work, they didn't know. They never thought that he would do such a thing, you know. Nobody recognize any sign of this drama.
When was the last time you had spoken to Marc?
You see, this happened on a Wednesday. I had seen him the Saturday before. And when he came at home, I think he was coming to say goodbye. But I just recognized that afterwards, you see. But when he came, he gave me a gift, I remember. And I said, "Why my birthday gift, which is at the end of December?" I said, "Why do you give my gift right now?" You see, I did not understand. So I didn't question over that, and I was questioning about his schools and things like that. But he was not straight, you know, like he was evasive, and I thought he was strange. But I didn't know what was going on. But most probably all this, he knew what he was doing. You know?
So when you heard, you know, that Marc had done this, what went through your mind? I mean, could you grasp that your baby, your son that you had birthed, had done this?
You see, Ecclesiastes 7:14 gives us an answer. If you're happy, rejoice. But if you're in pain, just consider, just think, you know. And it's like if I was asking myself, why, you know, this is the first question that comes to us. I was asking myself, what a little boy of 6, what does he have in mind, you know, when his father goes, his mother has to leave the house and go back to work, and then so most probably felt a lot of rejection, abandon, fear, you know, maybe anger too. And in these years, we were not talking about emotions that much. And then, well, for a long time I was considering all these emotions and why would he have done that? I have no proof of why. But I have some hypotheses. And then the first one I was asking myself, was he having a sickness, a mental sickness? Because we know sometimes like schizophrenia.
Yeah.
And then I said, maybe my son was a mental, a schizophrenic. And then he was not diagnosed. So that's one of the things I was thinking. The next thing I was thinking was, we didn't learn to speak about emotional pain, you know, especially boys. I mean, boys, they don't cry, they don't speak about what they feel inside because, you know, it's not for a man, because the man is strong and viril, and you know. So therefore, my son was a very secret little boy. He had 3 passions in life. He was very, very much interested in computers, even, you know, in 1970s, in electronics and in mathematics. And all his friends were having the same passion. So he was restrictive in his relation with other boys. He was not the sport guy, you know. So therefore, he never drank, never smoked, and he was always home, very systematic, very ordered, you know. He was a perfect child to raise, but he was keeping everything inside.
So when Monique heard that Marc had specifically targeted the women in the class, screaming, "I hate feminists," before opening fire, she was as shocked as everyone else.
And I was wondering, what was a feminist for him? Was she a woman that was making a good salary, had a good job? Then I could have been a feminist, you know, because I was earning my life very well. I was a director of nursing by then. So therefore, I said, what happened? So the image he had of the women, you know, was not something that I was teaching him.
And he never acted that way around you, that he was...
No, never mentioned that, never spoke about women. But I knew that he wanted to have a girlfriend, but I think he didn't know how to approach women, you know. He didn't have the image of a man, you know, that would have teach him how to do. Today I will tell young boys, go and speak with someone. But by then, you know, going to a psychiatrist was something awful, you know. You would feel shame about it.
How did your church family help you in those early days as well?
Okay, in church, small church, you know everybody. I had friends with these people. So therefore, they were just supporting me by prayer, by writing me letters or verses, you know, that I would read on my own. But I couldn't speak with them. Because during these years, if somebody would have asked me, how are you? I thought it was the worst question to ask someone who suffers, you know, because we don't feel well. So therefore, I appreciate very much their help, you know, but prayer and things like that. I remember going to church and crying from the beginning to the end, you know, of the service. But it was okay. And I was saying, this is my way of expressing myself, by tears.
When I was reading your book, I was moved to the fact that you, after Marc died, and you had buried him, that a lot of people wrote you letters.
Yeah.
And families wrote you letters. And you wrote them back a little card with Psalm 32.
Yeah.
Why Psalm 32?
It had touched me in the morning, you know, on this morning when I read it. On the day that I was writing. So I believe that what I write in the morning has to be applied during the day. So therefore I took some, I extract some of the verse there and put that because it had a meaning, you know. It speaks about God forgiving, you know, when we recognize our sin and things like that. And it had a purpose for me.
Were you surprised at how many people wrote you letters?
I was, because it wouldn't occur to me, you know, to take the pen and to write people that are in the news. But I was very surprised. And I was surprised by the Minister of Justice that phoned me, you know, the morning of the funeral to say, Madame, don't feel guilty. I was very surprised. I was the bishop, you know, that wanted to see me because people were asking the bishop, what do you do for Madame Lepine? Because they considered me as the 15th victim, okay? And a lot of people wrote me, and then I realized that finally we're not alone in this world. There's always someone somewhere that thinks of you, that pray for you. I have this testimony from many, many people that says, you know, Madame, I was praying for you that evening, you know. So I think that's one of the reason why I'm standing up today, you know. Why? Because a lot of people prayed for me. And then, well, I realized that I was not by myself and that I was different. I have a life of my own, on my own. And one day I stopped asking myself questions like why, and I said, what can I do, or how can I do it?
How was your daughter dealing with this? I mean, you have 2 children.
Yes, she was going to college. And then in their classes, all they were speaking about was this event. But she wouldn't dare say that it was her brother. Oh. And then what happened is that she took drugs. She took.
Was that her way of coping with what had happened with Marc?
She had started that before. Okay, but it was what you call soft drugs. But when this happened, it just went worse and worse. And 7 years after Marc's death, the policeman came again to my house to tell me that my daughter is very sick. And then I went to the hospital and saw her. She was in her last moment of life. And I said that the only consolation I had was to be there, you know, to assist her when she died, to tell her how much I loved her, to tell her how much Jesus loved her, you know, like if I was preparing her for the passage. And then she died of an overdose of cocaine. So I lost both of my children. That's when I was deep down, depressed. I was in my sorrow. I didn't have any desire to live anymore, you know.
Losing both of your children, I mean, I've heard parents say time and time again that you never think of losing your of burying your children. Your children are supposed to bury you.
Yeah, that's why it was so long. My grieving process took such a long time, you know. I can tell you it's only since God came to me that I feel that I have something on my own to do, that I have a life on my own, apart from my children. But it comes from God. It's a gift of God. Otherwise, I wouldn't be there. Yeah.
Is there anything you would have done differently?
I have a hard time answering because I live the present moment, you know, and I have a hard time going back, trying to find out if I would have done something. For sure today, you know, with the knowledge I have, if I would have had these knowledge then, I most probably would have reacted differently, you know. Because I think today what is important is the relation. First of all, the relation we have with God, but also the relation we have with other people. But you know, the society, I mean, puts a lot of importance on the performance, you know, which is not exactly what we should run about, you know, money and things like that, and work and work and work always. So certainly I would have given more time to my children just to listen to them, you know, to enjoy their presence. And I think that the family, when they do that, I mean, it's very good.
Would you say that you're still going through that healing?
Always. There's always something, you know. Yeah, deeper and deeper every day.
When did you forgive yourself? When did you?
Took me a long time, actually. I would say that maybe after 2001. It's like if I was realizing that God wanted me to live, you know, even though I had this experience of both of my kids to kill themselves. And then when I realized that I had the life on my own, I would go to judgment one day. And I said, well, what do I do of my time? I am a retired woman. I still have skills. What will I do with that? And that's when I asked for a meaning for my life, and it came to me. And I mean, the day before, you would have told me you will go on TV tomorrow, and I would have said no. But the grace of God comes when you need it, just when you need it. Not before, not after, but when you need it. And then I realized that it was my new way. It was my new life. And I decided that I would live that, okay? Because this pleased God, that I be where He wanted me to be.
Have you made contact with any of the families?
Actually, I had contact with 3 families. The first one I saw was La Famille Lemay. Why did I see them? Because there was another killing, another shooting in Montreal in 2006 in Dawson College. And then that night I remember that I cried out to the Lord again, and I said, well, come and get me. I don't want to live that anymore. Come and get me, or give a sense, a meaning to my life. And the next day I had this call from the journalist, Harold Gagné, and I knew that I would be on TV that day. I showed my face for the first time after 17 years. And it was called After 17 Years of Silence. And then they had some people to sort of speak about this mission the next day. And one of them was La Famille Lemay, which had a daughter, you know, that was killed. And I remember the lady, she said that she was ready to meet with me. So we arranged a meeting, you know, with them. And I remember the first time I looked at her and that she looked at me, we just sort of embraced and cried, you know, on each other's shoulders. And then it's like if I was seeing that the pain I had being the mother of the killer and the pain she had having lost her daughter, that it was the pain, you know. And we didn't think of the killer or the mother of the killer or the mother of a victim. We just embraced. And then after this emotional, we can go to speak with the rational. And then she had told me that her and her husband had done a spiritual experience, and they had forgiven my son already, you know. That's why they could see me. And I saw 2 other families, but only after my book came out in 2008.
So who was Marc Lepine?
At the age of 14, my son asked me for a change of names. I think he didn't want anything to do with his father. It was unusual, you know, to ask that as a gift for his anniversary, but that's what he asked. When he changed his name, he gave himself a new identity. And this boy is a secret boy that I don't know really. When I dream of my kids now, I always dream of Camille Garby, which was his name, when he was a small boy, you know, when we had this relation. You see, I've met a lot of prisoners in jail, and I just sort of consider that a lot of people know my son in his last hour. Like they will associate Marc Lepine to the last hour, a killer. But me, I don't see this. My son is in my heart. I see him in his entire life. So I cannot dissociate my little boy, you know. But it's the same with when I speak with these killers, you know. I said, you're here in jail because you did something wrong, but you're not defined by what you did in the last hour of your life. That's why we have another chance. And that's why I prefer not to see my son as the killer, the last hour of his life. I want to see all his life. The good moments, the bad moments, the good experience we had as a family, because I have good experience, which I keep in my heart. Okay? And today when I want to speak about Marc Lepine, is the stranger. He's the little boy that I don't really know. That makes his own choice, which were not mine. Which was not the way I raised him, you know, to be.
Now a prominent speaker traveling to churches and organizations, sharing her story, Monique Lepine admits she is slowly moving forward, helping other families affected by crime.
There's a family watching or a family member watching that has had, you know, someone in their life who has done something. What advice do you give to people, to family?
We pray, we read the Bible, we find out what God wants to tell us, but we need to forgive others, but to forgive ourselves too. Because we have a hard time with that. It's easier to forgive someone than to forgive ourselves. And that's when you realize, well, if I am a human being, you know, other people are human beings as well. And I mean, everybody has something, you know, inside. If I was speaking to everybody that I see, they all have a suffering somewhere inside. Maybe not with the intensity that I had. So therefore, personally, I think if you want to be ill, you have to look at the suffering without substance, you know, just to see the suffering and deal that with God, you know, in order to get healing.
What would you, if you had the chance to talk to Marc that day, what would you have said to him?
I already did a letter, you know, asking forgiveness to my own son. Well, I think I would do like this lady that lost her daughter, you know. I would just hug him. Because when I go and speak with kids, you know, that are juvenile kids, you know, that are in how do you call them? Juvenile...
Delinquents?
Delinquents. I saw some of them. And their questions to me is always, do you still love your son or your daughter? So I said, well, if they ask me this question, it's because for them it's very important that their parents love them still, you know, no matter what they did. So I would tell them, yes, I love my son, but I love the good memories, and the bad I don't want to hear about it, you know. So I will emphasize only on the good experience to protect myself. But I would embrace my son. I would love him still. I'm still loving him.